Right.
Right. Warm greetings to you, colleagues. I welcome you to our first session of AUI 3703 in the 2024 academic year. My name is Mr. Privilege, and I'll be facilitating you guys in this module through Grad Consulting. Now, one could ask, obviously, to say, when it comes to this module, what exactly is it that I need to know? Say, for instance, what is it that they examine in the exams, or even maybe say in the context of an assignment? What are those commonly tested topics of note that I need to give attention to? So I'm going to try and draw your attention from that perspective, so that at least you have a clear direction as to navigate yourself through this module. So there are three essential topics that are heavily tested in this module, which is namely performance auditing, fraud auditing, and IT auditing. Right. These are the key essential topics of note in AUI 3703, which you really need to have a thorough understanding of how each one of them is tested in the exam. Right. So I'm going to take you through one of the topics, obviously, in tonight's engagement, which is, of course, with respect to performance auditing. Right. But let's just quickly start from your study material, just so that at least you have an outline of what key topics are there in the module and how they blend together into those three. Because obviously, it's not to say simply because simply because you know performance auditing, fraud auditing, and IT auditing, then you should overlook other topics in the module. Does not necessarily imply that. So the other concepts, you would find them being examined, say, in the context of an MCQ-based question, because mostly in your exams, they do bring some MCQs. These are your multiple choice questions, so to speak. So your first topic deals with risk-based internal auditing. What does it mean when we're saying we're following a risk-based internal audit? That's the build up to the concept concerning risk management. But it's not really dealt with in a greater detail in the context of this module. But the three topics that I've mentioned to you, those are the ones which are of the utmost importance. Then, of course, second topic deals with introduction to specific internal audit engagements. So those are your consulting audit engagements. It would also include your assurance engagements as well, right? But this is like almost a repetition, because you find the same things being explained in AUI 2601 as well. Topic number 3 now, that's the one you need to give special attention to and gain an in-depth understanding of the concepts or principles that I explained therein. So topic 3 deals with performance auditing, and performance auditing can also be attributed to as operational auditing. So it's one in the same thing. It's just an interchange of terminology, but we are really talking of the same concept, right? I'm going to deal with that tonight. I'm going to introduce it, but we may not necessarily exhaust the topic or the concept in one sitting, right? Then, of course, topic 4 deals with fraud auditing. You also need to know fraud auditing, and I would explain to you in a greater detail what are those aspects that they test when it comes to fraud auditing. It's one of those that you can actually accumulate easy marks when it comes to an exam setup. And if they bring it in an assignment, you can also accumulate very simple and very easy marks, especially with regards to fraud auditing. One of the most longest topics is topic number 5, which is information systems auditing. Information systems auditing, which is also what I attribute as IT auditing. Now, it's one of the, it's one of the longest topics in this module. And when it comes to contribution of weights in the exam, it really weighs quite a lot. in the exam. So you need to really also gain an in-depth understanding of the principles that governs this particular concept of IT auditing. Now, topic 5 deals with other types of internal audit engagements, but these are mostly your consulting services, right? Primarily to be consulting services. What do you do when you're actually performing consulting services, apart from your actual audit engagements per se? That's topic number 6. Then lastly, topic number 7, it deals with the responsibilities of the auditor when it comes to reporting, as well as follow up on the completion of audit assignments. So let's say, for instance, you've been assigned to audit. Let's say, for instance, it was a compliance audit that you were doing, and you've already done the planning phase of the audit process, and you've gathered the evidence necessary, meaning to say you've already done the performance of the audit phase, and now you have to begin to report your findings to the board. So what is those responsibilities that you as an auditor is expected to do or to carry out during the process of reporting, and after the report has been issued to the board? You would have to do follow-up procedures at a later stage so that you can assess as to where the management have implemented the recommendations that you gave them. And not only that, but also to evaluate whether the recommendations that you have given them is actually addressing their problems. And when I'm saying here problems, I'm referring to addressing the weaknesses that might have been evident in the organization, or for instance, the risks that could have been, existent as you were doing the evaluation of the state of affairs in the organization. So now you want to, when you do the follow-up procedures, what you just want to establish is to say the recommendations that you have given them, are they adding value to the, to management, to the organization as a whole in that sense, right? So that's topic number 7, but we're going to deal with that in a greater detail when we get to that. So typically from this, you can get questions that are either both MCQ based, or you might find some questions that maybe could come as mix and match, or it could come even as an essay-based question. So I'm talking in regards to topic number 7. That's how they normally test it. But your examiner, from what I've observed over the years, right, I'm talking about dating back all the way from 2017 up to now, most of the questions, okay, they are centralized on 3 essential topics that I've mentioned to you, which is your performance auditing, fraud auditing, and IT auditing. And notice all these principles, the 3 that I've just outlined, they would be testing them as an essay-based question setup. So in other words, they would give you a system description, and they want you to address problems that are given within the case study scenario or the system description, as it were, right? So that's what they normally test. So what I'm going to do, so that at least we can begin to lay a foundation, we're going to begin to unveil the concept regarding to performance auditing. Why is it important for business organizations to actually implement, for them to rather conduct a performance audit, be it within specific divisions within the organization, or sometimes even with across the entire organization? We just want to evaluate our performance as a business entity. Why is it important for businesses or business organization, as it were, to implement this particular form or type of an audit, right? What is that thing that they want to achieve through that audit? So that's what I want to begin to explain to you in a greater detail. And as you might have maybe come across it at some point, performance auditing, it's centralized on what they call the 3 E's, which is namely your efficiency principles, your economy principle, and effectiveness. So those are the commonly common principles that you would actually encounter when you're dealing with performance auditing. And questions that they would bring in the exam, most of the times they would ask you maybe to perform or to formulate audit procedures pertaining to those 3 E's. All right. Or sometimes they can even ask you to draft some audit objectives surrounding any of the 3 E's. But I don't want to indulge into these details of things as yet. But I want to first start off by explaining the content regarding to the concept of performance auditing first. So let's get to that. I'm going to share the presentation just now in the group as well. Okay. All right. So now let's begin to unveil this particular principle of performance, or what they call operational auditing. What is it all about, really? Right. So let's start by looking at the content outline. Okay, I'm just going to skip some of those things. I want to come to the assumed knowledge aspect. Because the same notes that I've given you, I also use it for the guys or the group that is doing honors. So hence you notice, for instance, when with the content outline, you discover that I've indicated to say it's a recap from undergrad level for AUI 3703 concerning operational auditing and all that. But you don't need to really worry about that, because the concepts anyways, they are applicable in both modules. Right. So what is the assumed knowledge that you need to be able to have achieved by the end of this discussion? Number one, you should be able to understand the concept behind operational or performance auditing, explain the elements of operational auditing, and also be in a position to conduct, to know how to conduct an operational audit in a real life situation. And of course, being in a position to perform audit procedures, being able to perform audit procedures, especially with respect to the elements of operational auditing, right? So those the elements of operational auditing that are being referred to here, it's your 3 E's that I've mentioned earlier, which is your economy element, efficiency element, and the effectiveness element. So performance auditing is surrounded, so it's centralized on those 3 elements. Of course, there are other ones, but we don't discuss so much about those at this level. But the 3 E's, they are the ones that are more key as with regards to what they will test you in this module. Then, of course, be in a position to compile audit reports, right, pertaining to performance auditing. And then moving forward, they will ask you questions about formulating audit objectives pertaining to those 3 elements of operational auditing. You should also be in a position where you know when to perform operational audit. Under what circumstances would the board or perhaps management, initiate the need for an operational audit to be performed in their division or perhaps across the entire organization? How to perform operational audit, as well as to deploy the necessary changes for improvement, for improvement purposes. Yeah, please. Right. So now, from a simplest perspective, what is performance or operational audit really? So some can actually attribute performance audit to performance appraisal. So if there's a performance appraisal that is taking place, it means there's a comparison of actual performance against the set criteria or the set goals or the set objectives of management. So when you do a performance appraisal, what you just want to establish is whether what whether what you have planned to achieve versus what you have actually performed, they are agreeing together, or rather they are really within the same range. But if they are not, then we know for a fact that there's a problem. Then it means there are certain things that need to be addressed. So it also involves identifying of opportunities to make improvements. And this would help an organization, obviously, to save, right? To save money. And it also helps the organization to improve, their processes, as well as to be able to enhance the probability of achieving their objectives. So when you are looking at, for instance, identification of opportunity to make improvement, that's you already begin to see the three elements of performance auditing coming into the picture. Number one, the cost savings aspect. It's already indicating to you that the economy element, it deals with how the organization is utilizing the available resources, right? Process optimization. All right. This one, obviously, it's looking at the efficiency element. How well are we doing? I mean, how well are we conducting certain, procedures in or carrying out certain procedures within our organization, and then of course, effectiveness. It's all about whether we are achieving the desired outcomes or the desired objectives, that we have set. So you can only be effective if you are achieving the desired objectives, or if you are achieving the set goals, the organization, right? And then, of course, in the same process as we perform or conduct performance auditing, we need to be able to give recommendations of improvement to the existing procedures, as well as to help the organization or management in this case to deal with future events, right? So that's from a simplest perspective, just to give you a picture what performance auditing really entails. Now let's move on to the next slideshow. Now there's other definitions that are given by certain philosophers. For instance, Kessler and Crockett, they define operational auditing as a systematic process of evaluating an organization's effectiveness, efficiency, and economy of operations under management's control, and reporting to appropriate persons the results of the evaluation along with recommendations for improvement. So essentially what we can see from this description, or rather the definition of operational auditing, we already begin to see the three elements of operational auditing, which is of course effectiveness, efficiency, and the economy element. And all of these, they are just there so that is for us to be able to, to make improvements to how the organization is operating, right? Now, notice here that its objectives are to provide a means for evaluating an organization's performance and to enhance performance by making recommendations for improvement, right? On the next slide show, now let's begin to look at those components or elements of performance auditing. What are these components? What are those elements of performance auditing that we need to be able to know at the end of this discussion? Number one, the effectiveness component. Number two, efficiency component. Number three, the economy component. And then there's the financial component and compliance component. These other two, we don't necessarily deal with them in detail at this level in AUI 3703. But the ones that you really need to have a greater understanding of, it's your effectiveness component, efficiency, and the economy component. So with effectiveness, this is concerned with the extent to which the set objectives are being achieved. And then with efficiency is mostly directed to the process itself. How well are we, achieving the set objectives themselves? Yes, effectiveness is telling us, are we achieving the objectives? If we are, then yes, the answer is we are effective. But then the process to achieve those objectives, how efficient is it? So efficiency is mostly concerned with the process that we are following towards achieving the objectives themselves. But then economy, on the other hand, refers to the acquisition of the right quality, right quantity of resources at the lowest possible price. At the lowest possible price. So when we're looking at the economy element, we can already see, some elements of financial management, and we also begin to see that it's concerned with having the right quality and right quantity of materials. Sometimes, especially when you get to details, you would also discover that it deals with the right time, getting the right resources, right quantity at the right time, and in the right place as well. That's the economy element. But to make it simpler for you, right, when you hear the economy element, what should just come into your mind is we are dealing with the finance area or the management of resources, you know, within the organization. How well are they managing the resources that are available to them to use? Financial, it's concerned with proper and adequate accounting and reporting procedures. Compliance deals with compliance to applicable laws. So hence there's the financial and compliance. These are all separate and even different audits that we can actually perform, right? So there's what we call financial audits, which we internal auditors can actually perform on behalf of management. And what that is mainly concerned with, it's really the financial systems, but not necessarily the annual financial statements. Right. So our evaluations when it comes to financial audits is the adequacy of the financial systems that the organization is using to generate or to report on the financials. Whereas with the compliance audit, it's really mainly concerned with the complying. The compliancy with laws, the compliance with the policy of the organization, right? So hence you discover when you're now dealing with performance audit, we don't really indulge in details with regards to the financial component and the compliance component at this level, right? So those are the 5 important components. You can even get an MCQ-based question where they can just ask you to identify something or a component that is not part of the performance audit elements or components, you know. So if you know all these 5, it just becomes easier for you to pinpoint them, right? Now let's begin to gain some bit of insight with regards to economy and the efficiency element. Normally, when there's a discussion around these two, they normally discuss them under the same umbrella. Of course, they are not the same per se, because with one element, it's dealing with how are we managing the resources that we have, whereas with the other one, it's dealing with the actual process that we are following towards achieving the set objectives, and that's efficiency. But anyways, they normally even do the discussions about these 2 elements under the same umbrella. So now, achievement of the optimum balance between costs and results. Costs should always be kept to a minimum, but not at the expense of the results. So when I hear this, already that is telling me something to do with the economy element. Now, in this component, the way in which the organization apply its resources, such as human resources, facilities, equipment, materials, and funds, is analyzed. That's all about the economy element. What I've just read for you from the first and the second bullet point is dealing with the economy element so far. Economy, minimizing the cost. So the core objective behind this element, we're just trying to ensure that the organization is saving as much as possible on the expense or costs, you know, that is associated with the process or operation that they are carrying out. Efficiency, it's mainly concerned with the relationship between outputs and the resources that have been used to produce them. So it's in other words, efficiency is concerned with the input versus the output, right? But we're going to talk about that in a greater detail when we proceed. Now, what are those aspects that you need to consider when you're evaluating whether it's an economy element or whether it's an efficiency element? Because in a context of an exam, under normal circumstances, if they ask you to draft, for example, excuse me, if they ask you to draft whether, number 1, to draft audit procedures. Okay, I'm just going to outline the common things that they will ask you concerning this. Or if they ask you to draft audit objectives, all right, audit procedures, audit objectives. Here is your point of departure. So what are the key steps that you follow when you want to answer questions pertaining to this? And let's say, for example, they'll ask you to identify, to draft audit procedures or audit objectives for the economy element, for example. Or let me say economy component in this case. So what do I do when I get, let's say, for instance, a question that is telling me to draft audit procedures or perhaps audit objectives pertaining to the economy element? My point of departure there is to enlist for myself, number 1, or rather, is for me to identify aspects. Okay, identify the aspects that affects the economy element. That's your first point of departure. So you identify the aspects that affect that particular element or component that is being tested. So in this case, the economy element. Once you have identified the aspects that that affect that particular element, it becomes easier now to draft the required. So when I'm saying now to draft the required, I'm referring to whether they've asked you to draft audit procedures, or perhaps they've asked you to draft audit objectives. It becomes easier to draft all of these things. Why am I saying that? Because for each aspect, you can draw an audit procedure from it. For each aspect, you can actually draft some audit objective statements from it. So now that's what I'm trying to explain to you when I'm saying aspects to consider when you're evaluating the economy and efficiency elements. So essentially, each one of these aspects, there is a procedure that can come out of this first aspect. There can be another audit procedure that can come out of this other aspect. Same thing with the staffing in relation to the functions that have to be performed. So for each one of these aspects, you can draw audit procedures from them, or you can even draw audit objectives. Suppose they ask you to draft, objectives or audit procedures pertaining to that one particular components of the 3 E's. So in this case, we're looking at those that affect the economy and the efficiency element. Right. So number one aspect is the purchasing policy of the organization. That's one aspect you need to consider, especially if you are dealing with the economy element. Remember, I've combined these two, economy and efficiency, but as I'm reading them, I can clearly tell you, okay, this particular aspect, it's more relative to the economy element or perhaps the efficiency. So with the first one, this is more relative to the economy element. Number two, material prices and service costs. Again, it's more relative to the economy element. So if I'm to draft a procedure, for instance, starting with the first aspect, purchasing policy of the organization, one of the things I would perform an inquiry with management as to whether there is any purchasing policy in existence within the procurement division, for example, depending on whatever department that you're looking at. But you already know that, okay, well, in this case, there is need for me to evaluate maybe the purchasing policy because they are procuring certain inventory items from suppliers outside of the organization. Another important aspect of note is staffing in relation to the functions that have to be performed. I repeat again, staffing in relation to the functions that have to be performed. We can only be efficient if we have got the sufficient number of employees to perform the workload at hand. So let's say, for example, you've got 5 employees, but then the workload that needs to be done or to be performed requires 20 employees. What that means is you're going to have delays in achieving your objectives, even if you may achieve them, but then the answer would be that you are not efficient. So when I'm looking at staffing in relation to the functions that have to be performed, this one is associated to the efficiency component. Surplus stock on hand, all right? So if we always have massive surplus stock on hand, then that would also imply that we're not being efficient. But if ever we are utilizing whatever that is supposed to be utilized and everything is utilized accordingly, then it means we are being efficient. But at the same time also, if we are saving, it will be good. And so with this particular aspect, it's more related to both efficiency and economy anyways. The use of more expensive equipment than necessary. The use of more expensive equipment than necessary. Again, this one, it's economy. It's pretty straightforward. Because, I mean, if you've got an option to buy from a more reasonable supplier in terms of pricing, and then, but you decide to buy from an expensive supplier, that simply means that you're not being economical, right? And then there's a prevention of losses and wastage of resources. So you need to look at that aspect, whether there are whether they are deploying such practices in their organization. So if there's prevention of losses and wastage of resources, this means that they've got certain policies in place, or they've got certain internal control systems that they've put in place that helps them to manage wastage of resources, for example. So one of them I can give as an example, especially let's say we are looking at a situation where it's a production company. For every production activity that transpires, there has to be a production plan in place that the organization follows. And they cannot, and with certain industries of production purposes, they cannot do production unless they have a demand. Unless they have an order, rather, that they've received from the customer. Otherwise, you end up just, producing goods or inventory items that may not really sell or on a timely basis, or that may never sell at all. So if they don't sell on time, okay, that can be a problem, because now you're going to have increased costs on storage. And if they are not selling at all, then it means you've already incurred a loss, overall. And now in that case, that may not have good consequences to the organization in terms of liquidity and solvency, right, of the company. So those are some of the aspects that you look at when you're dealing with the economy element. Now, division of projects into logically manageable tasks. Do they have, when you're looking at this aspect, you're looking at, let's say it's a division, a department within the organization. Have they categorized responsibilities within that division to certain individuals? So let's say it's a human resource department. You've got somebody that is supposed to be the head of the division. So that's the HR manager. And then you might have somebody that is a clerk, maybe, that is handling, the pay slips, or let's just say the payroll of the entire organization. So these two separate responsibilities have to be separate. There has to be some sort of segregation of duty that is in place. So if we don't see that, right, and we just see that, okay, there is only one person in the human resource department, and this person is the head of the department, is responsible for payroll, responsible for everything, literally, then it means that process might not be as efficient in that regard. So efficiency is achieved if ever there is division of work in the department. Efficiency is achieved if we have got separate departments operating independent of each other within the organization. So these are some of the aspects that you'll be looking at when you want to evaluate the economy and the efficiency element. Okay, it's not done. It still continues to the next page. Right. Efficiency and application of operating systems and procedures. So you also look at that. You look at the documentational flow. How is the flow of documents within the department? How is the flow of documents out of the department with other departments in the organization, or maybe with an external party? So if there is no flow of documentations taking place, all right, that already should tell you that there is a probability that there is no record keeping taking place, and there could be perpetration of there could be fraud being perpetrated by the senior management within the division in that organization. So when you're dealing with the documentational flow, what we are trying to evaluate is the efficiency of the process. And then performance of unnecessary tasks or duplication of tasks. The moment I'm seeing duplication of efforts, then that alone should tell me that there's lack of efficiency within the division. All right. So hence I was saying, for example, if you've got a human resource manager, right, the human resource manager has got certain responsibilities that will be assigned to him or her, separate and completely different from the ones of of a payroll clerk, for example, right? So in that respect, it means there will be no duplication of efforts or duplication of tasks. Why? Because their responsibilities are separate and they're independent of each other. But if we have got the same responsibilities of an HR director or HR manager being performed by the payroll clerk, then it means we have a problem now. Because in that case, we have duplication of tasks, means we are not being efficient. And that also could lead to wasting of company resources. right? Allocation of responsibilities and authority in an organization. If there is an adequate or appropriate allocation of responsibilities and authority in the organization, it means the process is efficient. But if it is not even clearly defined, all right, how responsibilities are assigned to people or who is responsible for what, and maybe say, for instance, there are 5 employees in the warehouse department and everybody can just do the same responsibility. And that way, we already know that the process in that department would not be efficient. Because how would you know if something goes wrong? Who would you hold accountable if they are all doing the same thing? So responsibilities, whether it's in a particular department or division, or whether it's across the departments, various departments in the organization, they have to be clearly defined and even clearly communicated to those who will be affecting them in the organization, right? So that way, if ever there is a clear communication of who is responsible for what authority or degree of authority do they have in that capacity, then it follows that the process is being efficient, or it follows that the organization is being efficient in that regard. Speed of production and completion time of projects. If there's delays in achieving of certain tasks, it means the process is being inefficient, right? So those are some of the aspects of note when it comes to economy and efficiency.